Liftoff.
Good afternoon. My name is Elise Pipkin Allen, and I am the chair of BAPAC. For those that you who don't know, BAPAC stands for Black American Political Association of California, and this is the San Diego chapter. Thank you so much for joining us today. At dusk on Memorial Day, May 25th, 2020, outside the Cup Foods grocery store at East 38th Street and Chicago Avenue in South Minneapolis, George Floyd died. At his funeral, the Reverend Al Sharpton said, "George Floyd was an ordinary brother. His death made him the cornerstone of a movement." BAPAC San Diego joins that movement in many ways. One way is convening virtual candidate forums that are intentionally centered around racial and economic injustice as it relates to Black people, beginning with their first virtual forum for the San Diego Unified School Board in June. Then in July 1st, there was an acknowledgement of the death of the iconic John Lewis, and we held our second virtual forum for the City Council with 9 candidates. In August, we convened a virtual forum for the Board of Supervisors. And in September, we acknowledged the passing of another iconic figure, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, RBG, and convened the congressional races for districts 49, 50, 52, and 53. Today, in October, we are proud to convene the race for city attorney. We've elected to do our movement through voter education work because educated voters are important in all elections, and particularly in this election, because we believe the soul of America is on the ballot, and we have to decide which America we want to be. And we think elected voters are the best voters to help us do that. And now, I am pleased to welcome our forum moderator, who is Cheryl Aletha Phelps, who will first provide a brief overview of the role and responsibilities of the San Diego City Attorney, acknowledgement of candidates, program format, and rules of engagement. Cheryl, please meet Cheryl Aletha Phelps. Thank you.
Thank you, Elise. Greetings, everyone. My name is Cheryl Aletha Phelps. Thank you for joining us. It is my great privilege to serve as moderator of another BAPAC San Diego Voter Education Forum. The purpose of this nonpartisan convening is to give all people, particularly Black voters in our region, the opportunity to hear from candidates seeking to represent us as city attorney for the city of San Diego. San Diego, the 8th largest city in the United States. It's a city of some 1.4 million plus people and the centerpiece of a binational mega region of more than 5 million people. The city attorney serves as chief legal advisor to San Diego's mayor, city council, and all of city government generally. The city attorney also serves as criminal prosecutor for misdemeanor violations and infraction, and the city attorney represents the city in civil lawsuits when the city is sued or when the city sues. The candidates for the position are attorney Mara Elliott, the incumbent who was first elected in 2016. Welcome, Mara. And attorney Corey Briggs, a taxpayer advocate and challenger. Welcome, Corey.
Thanks, Cheryl.
The candidates will have no more than 2 minutes for opening statements, no more than 1 minute to respond to questions, and 2 minutes for closing statements. During our yes, no, I don't know round, you will only have a few moments to respond, so please be on your toes as to not miss the opportunity. Regarding the questions, the BAPAC San Diego Candidate Forum Committee conferred with local subject matter experts to compile these questions. None were made available to the candidates beforehand. And time permitting, we will take questions from the audience after our planned Q&A. So it is my pleasure to now turn the program over to BAPAC San Diego Candidate Forum Committee Chairman Kevin White, who will provide context for this important convening, introduce our guest panelists, and then invite candidates to make their opening statements. Kevin?
You're muted, Kevin.
Okay, thank you, Cheryl. And good afternoon, everyone. The 2020 presidential election is the most important in a generation. It occurs at a time our nation, state, and city are rocked by multiple crises. From COVID-19 and the long-standing racial and economic inequalities, it has exposed and worsened to the growing poverty and homelessness, over policing of our communities of color, a broken justice system, and a broken immigration process, and so on. This election is more than about who will be our next president. The choices we make all will determine what direction San Diego, as the self-proclaimed America's finest city, takes on many important issues that have embroiled our country, state, and local communities. Today's forum presents two candidates for a very important leadership position in the city of San Diego, the city attorney. As Cheryl mentioned, the city attorney serves as the chief legal advisor to the mayor, city council, and all city departments, and as the city's prosecutor. San Diego voters, and particularly Black voters, are interested in knowing more about the candidates' commitment to equal justice and their positions on other matters that are vital to our well-being. When we cast our ballots, we need to know we're voting for a person who will best represent our interests fairly, wisely, and equitably. So expect some tough questions. Candidates, we welcome you and thank you for making time to join us today and address our concerns. Also, we thank BAPAC Chair Alan Nash and Vice Chair Elise Pipkin-Allen for their extraordinary work in making this event possible, and Cheryl Alethea Phelps, our guest moderator for these forums. Joining Cheryl and me today, convening is Arameek Glass-Blake, Executive Director of Generation Justice and Restorative Justice Consultant. Now let's get started. Candidates, before we came live, the candidates were able to make a choice by a flip of the coin in determining who would go first to open and then who would go first to close. So with that, we'll hear first from Corey.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks to BAPAC for convening today. Thanks to everybody who's watching wherever it is that you're watching. I'm Corey Briggs. I'm running for city attorney for 3 reasons. Number one, I want to get rid of the politics in the office and return it to being a law office. Secondly, we need transparency in government. The public is entitled to know what the top law enforcement official, the top elected law enforcement official, is doing on the public's behalf, what the top legal advisor is doing on the public's behalf. Nothing that lawyers should do should be a secret. When you're the client, you should know what your lawyer's doing. When you're the public, you should know what your lawyer's doing. Third, I want to return confidence, the public's confidence, in the quality, the competency, and the ethics of the city attorney's office. We don't have that right now. You have 7 of 9 council members trying to get rid of the advisory role of this city attorney, of this incumbent. You have an incumbent who tried to gut the California Public Records Act to make it harder for the public to know what's going on. You have an incumbent who doesn't read major contracts that cost the city tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars for malpractice. That's unacceptable. I've been representing taxpayers most of my professional career for the last 20 years or so, and the last 18 in San Diego. I'm always representing the public in court. I've sued the city many times because most of the rules are broken at City Hall, and they're broken with the assistance, not over the objection, but with the assistance of the city attorney's office. That's unacceptable. It ends up costing real money. It has bad consequences. I'm not running to make headlines. I'm running to make a difference for San Diegans. San Diegans deserve to be fully represented, and every San Diegan deserves to be represented by the city attorney's office. We don't have that now. We will have it under Corey Briggs. I've been doing this and acting on this ethic my entire professional career. I sit on the board of Partnership for Advancement of New Americans. I sit on the board of Community Advocates for Just and Moral Governance. This is what I believed in long before I was recruited to run against the incumbent. And this is what you'll be getting if I'm your next city attorney. Thank you.
I'm San Diego City Attorney Mara Elliott. Thank you to BAPAC for coordinating this very important forum. I'm so glad to have an opportunity to meet with you and talk to you about what I've done over the last 4 years. But before we get into the forum, I just want to introduce myself to you as who I am. I am the first woman, first Latina to hold the position of San Diego City Attorney. I'm raising school-aged children while I am operating as City Attorney. And I'm very proud of the record that I bring to my office. I have devoted my entire legal career to public service. That's why I went to law school. And I ran for city attorney after rising through the ranks of my own office, joining the office back in 2009, and determining that this city needed somebody who was committed to their well-being and wanted to protect them. And I have made my record very clear that's exactly what I intend to do and what I have done. And I carried through when it came to gun violence restraining orders and creating a nationally recognized program that keeps all of us safe. We've removed more than 600 guns from the streets of San Diego. That is absolutely unprecedented. We have stepped up to protect victims of domestic violence and human trafficking. That's an expansion of services that we provide for free and in confidence to anybody, not just within the city of San Diego. And I've created our first program to protect our elderly population, people who are often left behind because they don't have relatives or people who care. I am known for my work in criminal justice reform. We have created many programs with the intention of helping people get back on their feet and avoid the criminal justice system. That's extremely important to me. As a person, I come from a modest background. My mother was an immigrant to this country from Mexico as a teenager, didn't speak the language, and certainly did see what it was like to be in a marginalized community. My father was a longshoreman who served for 40 years and then retired, and having a job like that enabled him to help me become the first in my family to graduate from college. So it is an honor and a privilege to serve all of you. I hope that we have time to hear directly from you. I think candidates always need that, not just all the candidates doing the talking. So I welcome this and thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Cheryl?
Thank you for your statements, candidates. I neglected to mention in the rules keeping part that if you go over time, I will say time. Okay. And if that is not heard, then Kevin will say time, and then we'll figure out what to do from there. So thank you for your statements. So that we can establish a baseline of sorts, I'd like you, if you would, to please answer the following questions with a yes, no, or I don't know if you don't have an opinion to offer. This isn't to expand on your thinking, but just to give us some guideposts. So for the next one, and we'll just take them in the order that we just began, and then which will be Corey first, Mara second. First question: if elected or re-elected, will Black Lives Matter in your policy decision making? Yes, no, or I don't know.
Yes.
Yes.
Mara? Is systemic institutional structural racism a problem in the city of San Diego? Corey, yes or no?
Yes.
Mara?
Yes.
Are you knowledgeable about specific issues of concern raised by and or affecting San Diego's Black communities that you can address as an elected official? Corey, yes or no?
Yes.
Mara?
Yes.
Thank you. Kevin?
Okay. The city's lease-to-own deal to acquire the former SDG&E building at 101 Ash Street is very problematic and increasingly costly to San Diego taxpayers. The troubled transaction is a point of contention in the mayor's race and in this contest as well. Without getting into the blame game or into the weeds about financial or legal disputes, what is your expert opinion on the best outcome for the people of San Diego? Let's go with Mara first.
Well, I want to make clear that this deal, despite what my opponent has repeatedly stated, occurred before I was city attorney. But I have made it an absolute priority to clean it up because it was a bad deal. And I believe that we still need that building. And I think the best outcome for the San Diegans is that we come to a resolution where we can occupy the building. Right now, we cannot occupy it. And that we're able to get concessions and payment from the company that sold us the building to remediate it so that it can be occupied. And I have hired the best and the brightest to help us to try to negotiate such a deal. My concern would be litigation that goes on for 10 years, because ultimately we do need this building. We do need to remedy this situation so that we can go forward instead of worrying about the albatross that's around the necks of San Diego. So absolutely, this is the priority. I'm confident that with the team I have on board and with my skill set as an attorney with almost 30 years of public sector experience, we will be able to get the best possible deal for San Diego taxpayers.
Okay. Corey?
Sure. Let me first clear up a misstatement by the incumbent. Her 30 years of public service experience resulted in her approval of this contract. It's her stamp of approval on it. She told the Union Tribune last month during a forum that the reason she didn't say something about the bad language is that she didn't want to, quote, create chaos. That is not looking at transactions through the lens of taxpayers. The best outcome would be for us to give the keys back to the landlord and get all of our money back. If the landlord then remediates the building and it's safe for occupancy, and it turns out to be the best deal at the time, we can consider it then. But we overpaid and bought a lemon. And we did it when the last person who could have stopped it decided to go along with the special interests instead of standing with the taxpayers. Now, we don't need the building unless we are bringing back the full workforce to work physically on site. One thing that we learned with the...
Thank you. Mika?
San Diego County has the nation's 4th largest population of people experiencing homelessness. According to last year's local census, Black San Diegans, who make up less than 6% of the region's population, constitute for 22% of our population's unsheltered people. What is the San Diego City Attorney's role and responsibility in addressing our unsheltered crisis? And we'll go with Corey first.
Thank you. So the role is twofold. Number one, you have a role as the prosecutor. Being homeless is not a crime. So the prosecutor should not be prosecuting people who cannot afford a roof over their head. It's unconstitutional to do so, and yet we continue to see the law enforcement system, including the city attorney's office, bring criminal proceedings against people for nothing more than being unable to afford shelter. Secondly, because the city attorney is the city's legal advisor on policy, every opportunity that the city attorney has to advise the council and the mayor on their housing policies, on their economic policies, on their policies making sure that people have access to treatment for drug and alcohol addiction and mental health issues, that should be front and center, because the city eliminates affordable housing like single room occupancy hotels. It does lots of things that have these unintended consequences of putting people on the street because they're already barely getting by. You never hear this city attorney go to the dais and make the pitch on economic policies, on housing policies, on any of the other policies to let the mayor and the city council know what's happening and how it affects us.
Mara? Thank you, Corey. Mara?
Thank you, Mika. First, I want to go back to the last question and just say, if he puts words in my mouth, I would like to have the opportunity to rebut that. That was an absolute mischaracterization of the meeting I had with the UT. and he knows that. And he knows that I wasn't trying to avoid chaos. He knows this was a vetted deal in public with several meetings before there was a decision made and before I was city attorney.
Excuse me, I just want to interject here because I really don't want you to use up all of your time with this, Mara.
Gerald, it's important.
And just point out that the purpose of this forum is not to make these challenges back and forth against each other. We are certainly taking note of whether or not the person is answering the question.
Yeah, I would appreciate that.
We don't have provisions to allow equal time for those types of challenges because this isn't a debate. It's an education forum. So we're going to restart your time.
Okay.
And strongly recommend to both that you focus on the question. We certainly are very aware that you're in a contest. Thank you. Mara, Mika, do you want to restate the question?
Oh, I have it, Mika. You don't have to unless you want to. All right. Okay. So absolutely, we play a role in working with our homeless population. And it is untrue to say that we prosecute people for being homeless. That would be contradictory to a class action settlement that exists in the city of San Diego. What my office does is we get to the root of the problem when we encounter anybody in the criminal justice system. And often people become homeless because they have something like a drug addiction that has caused them to start stealing. They enter into our criminal justice system. They have become homeless. Circumstances have led them there. And we have created programs so we can get to the heart of the problem and not punish them for having a drug addiction. And one of our best is called the San Diego Misdemeanors at Risk Track program, where in exchange for somebody taking a bed and taking services and letting us help them, we clear their record. The hardest part has been finding beds. So we purchased a hotel to house these low-level misdemeanors who are ready for change. And Corey Briggs sued us to prevent us from opening it under the guise that somehow we were taking up visitor accommodations, even though the Coastal Commission agreed that we were not. This was a drug-ridden hotel that was hardly being used.
Thank you. I just want to do a little bit of follow-up, if that's okay, Ms. Cheryl. So, and I'll start with Corey again and then Mara. You touched a little bit on what the city, as a city attorney, you can do to decriminalize homelessness and the stigma of poverty. Can we get some factual things that you know you would do if you are elected or reelected?
You bet. So on any policy matter that goes to the city council dealing with economics, housing, things of that sort, there will be a city attorney's analysis of how it will affect San Diegans and could end up increasing interfaces with the criminal justice system. Anytime there's a policy proposal put forward, the lawyer who does both the advising and sees people on the criminal justice side should be telling the mayor and the city council what the potential unforeseen consequences on our criminal justice system are. So when they're talking about where they're going to be investing monies, how they're going to expand contracting opportunities for contractors who come from underrepresented groups, all of these things have an indirect impact on who ends up facing criminal justice issues. You never hear the city attorney making that case to the policymakers. I will begin making that case. I can't change their policy. I don't have a say in what their policy ultimately is. But as the attorney, it's my job to counsel them so that they fully understand all of the potential consequences, good and bad, of what they were doing. You will see that on every policy proposal that has even the slightest potential to affect the work we have to do on the other side of the coin.
Thank you, Corey. Mara.
I want to make clear that the city attorney is not the policymaker. The council is, and the prosecutors advocate for justice on behalf of the people of the state of California. They don't come and report to the council. That politicizes the system. So when it comes to the criminal division of my office, I work with people who know more than I do to try to come up with programs that are really going to address real issues in our community. And after the murder of George Floyd, I challenged my entire staff to come up with ideas so that we can make sure that we were trying to help resolve a problem we all know exists. We have a racial equity program in our office to try to get to the root of the problem. I meet regularly with the community. I took it upon myself to call our Black faith community to see what was going on and how we can help. That's the kind of proactive thing I think that's going to address issues. I also offer to pay for the disparity study out of my own budget because I think it's important to make sure that every San Diegan has an opportunity to do work with the city of San Diego. And even when it comes to our own hiring practices, we do everything we can to ensure we've got diversity in the panel, and I do final interviews for all hiring to make sure that we are opening opportunities to everybody. It's going to take
time.
Got it.
We're actually going to get into that a little later. So, no worries, we got you. If you will, candidates, please give a one-word yes, no, or I don't know. If you don't have an opinion, 3 questions here. Are Black San Diegans and communities of color over-policed?
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes.
Mara?
Yes.
Next question. Is it necessary, and it's a little long, is it necessary to reduce the role, responsibilities, and presence of the police in communities of color and in schools? And to reallocate a percentage of police funding to support community-based, non-law enforcement solutions? Corey?
Yes, this was the thesis of my UT column.
That's longer than 1 word, thank you. Mara?
Cheryl, I'm sorry, I missed the beginning of your statement.
I'll read the whole thing. Is it necessary to reduce the role, responsibilities, and presence of police in communities of color and in schools, and to reallocate a percentage of police funding to support community-based, non-law enforcement solutions? Yes, no, I don't know, if you don't have an opinion.
Mm-hmm.
So both yes, is that correct? All right. Are there, next question, last question. We'll start with Mara with this one. Are there certain municipal code violations which you favor abolishing or decriminalizing?
Yes.
Corey?
Yes.
Thank you. Kevin?
Okay. And following up with the area of equal justice, and you did mention the killing of George Floyd sparked worldwide protest against anti-Black systematic racism and a national conversation about police violence. This conversation is not new to Black San Diegans. Equal justice advocates across the nation and here at home are calling for greater investment in community-based, non-law enforcement alternatives and divestment from policing. Now, as a legal advisor to our city government, how would you recommend the city approach balancing the people's legitimate public safety concerns with calls for deeper investment in community-based non-law enforcement interventions? Amar?
Yeah, I couldn't agree with your statement more. And something that I will be working on and have started to work on for my second term is conflict resolution in communities. And I repeatedly have heard since the murder of George Floyd from communities that they don't want law enforcement in their neighborhoods unless they need us. And I think that was really an aha moment for me. And the more we talked about it, what they said is, give us an opportunity to solve our problems. The problem we've got is we don't have the resources to do it. So we want you to help us, give us resources so we can be successful. And if we are not successful, we want you to come in and help us. I think that makes a lot of sense. And I want to go back to that. I also think there was a time where our officers lived in the community and where they really got to know their neighbors. It wasn't somebody who was coming from Temecula and policing a neighborhood they don't understand, that they haven't formed relationships in. We need to move in that direction, whether it's trying to find housing opportunities or creating a future for our own employees so that they can get to know communities better. I think there's a lot of false assumptions that really screw up our community justice system.
Okay, Corey?
So I'm not going to wait till my second term to tackle these issues. The data that these problems have existed predate 2016. They need to be addressed starting day one. I think that you can have, for example, teams to respond to certain calls where the issue is clearly one of mental health. We don't need to send police on every single call. Number two, we need to have police officers living in our communities. We need to make budget priorities so that neighbors know their police and police know their neighbors. Number three, we need to stop protecting bad cops. We need to stop keeping secret lists of bad cops. If we know that they're dishonest, they should be prosecuted. The city attorney's office has the authority to prosecute. The city attorney's office currently keeps a secret list on the grounds that it's better for the public not to know who the dishonest officers are. The public should know who is not a faithful law enforcement official. Those officials should be held accountable and should not be on our payroll. That will bring immediate improvements in community relations.
Thank you.
The San Diego-based Coalition for Police Accountability and Transparency, CPAC, has proposed a city ordinance called Protect, preventing over-policing through equitable community treatment. That includes, as city attorney, it will be your decision whether or not to approve the Protect ordinance when it is presented to the city. If elected, re-elected, will you approve the Protect ordinance? Why or why not? And I went with Corey first. Last time I'll go with Mara.
Our job at the city attorney's office is to review things for legality, not to set the policy for the city of San Diego. I would want to work with whichever council member is bringing that forward to make sure that what is in there is legal and doable. And often we have dreams, but there's a lot of other laws that may be interfering, or there's problems that I want to bring to the attention of the person who is bringing it forward. So my job is not to decide whether it's a good idea. It's to make sure that we've got the resources to support the council members with their policy objectives in getting something like that passed. So yes, of course, I'm going to work with them to make that legal, to do what they need to do to fulfill their policy objectives. And I have to respond to that last statement about secret lists, if I have a moment.
Does she have time?
Thank you. And the public defender and I actually wrote an op-ed for the community because the secret list allegation gets people stirred up, and it's false. It is based on a U.S. Supreme Court case that requires us to keep these lists that we disclose to defense counsel. If you've got an officer that's got credibility issues, I think the public really needs to understand that. And it influences whether we bring a case. If somebody's got credibility issues, we're not going to bring a case. Let's be honest here.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ro.
Okay, so what role does the city attorney play in addressing issues around bias in policing?
Aramaic, sorry, were you going to let me answer the question about the Protect ordinance?
Oh, I'm sorry. With that follow-up, it threw me off. Go ahead. Sorry, Corey.
That's okay. I just wanted to make sure we hadn't shifted.
No.
So it depends on what the final language looks like. I haven't seen the latest version of the language, but here's what I understand is in it, and here are the concepts I support. We should not have pretext stops. They're unconstitutional. They've already been happening. Everybody knows they're happening. The city attorney, as the police department's top legal advisor, should have already put that to bed. It should not be happening. We shouldn't be using these consent searches. They're not really free voluntary consent. Consent is a misnomer. Everybody knows it, including the city attorney, but she has continued to let it go. I don't support that. We need to fix the lack of confidence. People in Skyline and Paradise Hills should have the same confidence that La Jolla and Pacific Beach have in the police departments. So I'm going to support any ordinance that is lawful. And as long as we continue to have discrimination built into the rules, I'm not going to be signing off on it. It's not as a policy matter. Mara's right that the lawyers don't get to do policy, but it is my job to say what's constitutional and what's lawful. And we're doing things that are unlawful.
Thank you so much, Corey. Okay, back to the question I just asked. What is the role that the city attorney plays in addressing bias in policing? And then I have some follow-up questions for you. And we'll go with Corey.
Sure. So a couple of things. Number one, the city attorney's office provides legal advice to the police department. So the city attorney's office should be making sure that the policies are not biased. And yet we have many, many studies that show that the bias continues, including now under this city attorney. Secondly, the city attorney's office compounds the bias by doing prosecutions of people who were arrested or charged because of biased policing. That is unacceptable. The city attorney's office also should be doing fully blind reviews of the referrals that come in so that the charging prosecutors know only the basic facts that go to the elements of the crime, as opposed to demographic information and other information that would allow them and their implicit biases to come through. Those are the things that the city attorney's office should be doing right now, should have been doing 4 years ago, should have been doing even before.
Thank you, Corey. Mara?
I want to make clear that the police chief does not report to the city attorney. The police chief reports to the mayor. And I think that that's been a little bit commingled in this discussion. And so much of this we've already done. The idea of reviewing a case and taking out all potential bias is not novel. We are working with Stanford University. We almost have our technology ready. It can help us review a case to take out indicators of gender or culture or race. And that's really important. We do a lot of training in my own office to make sure that bias does not interfere with our judgment as prosecutors. I also want to point out something interesting. Skyline as a community was mentioned, yet Corey tried to prevent a library from being built in Skyline. And these are communities that really need our attention. They need us to be there and to hear from them. And I also want to point out that he's vowed to eliminate our criminal division if he were elected city attorney and allow the district attorney to handle our cases. That's just going to escalate potentials to help people get back onto their feet. And we have so many programs that are geared towards that, creating the system.
Mara. So a follow-up question to this question around bias policing. And then I have individual questions that are specific to the roles that you guys play right now. What is your response to the 2017 SDSU study and the December 2019 Campaign Zero report that each documented racial bias policing in the city of San Diego using SDPD and sheriff's department's own data? Corey, if elected, what specific action will you take to address the racial profiling that occurs in the city of San Diego? And Mara, as the incumbent, please share what specific steps you have already taken to address the racial profiling that occurs within the city of San Diego. And Mara, you can go ahead.
Okay, well, one thing is I did read all the studies and there are some valid points. I'm looking forward to having a new mayor who's going to work on the important issues. I actually have it sitting right here to try to address this. And I don't think we have seen that in the leadership that we've had over the last years. A good example of the work I've done has been the Stanford technology I just described to you. It is trying to ensure as an arm of law enforcement that we are doing our share to identify and remediate biases that we know exist. We know exists. I hear it from you. I hear it from others in the community. And I play a part of the system, but I cannot change the city completely by myself. I'm looking forward to having partners that are going to take the issue seriously, especially since I don't control some of these divisions of government that really do need that remediation. I think we have seen some encouraging changes since the murder of George Floyd. I hope that that is just the beginning. The chokehold, a review of policies, the emphasis of de-escalation, the study of whether we should be putting more money into helping combat real issues instead of criminalizing issues. I feel like we're getting there, but there's a long road ahead.
Thank you, Mark.
Sure.
Corey, do you need me to repeat the question or you remember?
You asked what I would do about racial profiling, correct?
Yes, and referencing the studies, the SDSU studies.
Yeah, but I agree with the studies. It's unfortunate that we have to continue to study this issue. There were studies before those that pointed us in the same direction. I'm not going to wait until my second term to start looking at this. I'm going to do it on the first day. I mentioned some of the concepts that I agree with on the Protect ordinance. I mentioned doing blind reviews. All of those things will be done from day one. But I want to be clear about something. It's not the mayor's fault that the police department gets bad legal advice and is allowed to continue discriminatory policing practices. The city attorney's office is the top legal advisor. If the city attorney thinks that the police department's not doing the right thing, you take a public memo to the city council and the mayor, and you let them know that illegal things are happening and they need to be fixed. You don't keep your mouth shut because you're in bed with the police union. You represent the public and the taxpayers, and you see something, you say something. You don't go along with it.
I just have a quick follow-up question, Corey, and then Mara. What do you do when the mayor and the police do not follow your recommendations or instructions? What will you do if elected or re-elected?
You asking that to me first?
Yeah.
Sure. So I have vowed to full transparency. So on issues like this, I would write memos. We will do regular reviews of police practices so that the public is aware. Mara's correct that the city attorney can only do so much. She doesn't do anything. I will do as much as I can by making the public aware so that they can bring the political pressure to the mayor and to the city council. The public is entitled to know what's happening and what's not happening. So I will use the office to apprise the city of what's really going on negative police practices so that they can be fixed. Sometimes they need money, sometimes they need education, sometimes they're going to need personnel changes, but the public is entitled to know that, and that means the mayor and the city council do.
Mara, thank you, Corey. Mara?
Relationships are important. Ultimately, what we want is compliance. We want change. And to be blowing the whistle and making accusations and calling people fraudsters and doing whatever it is that I think he may do is not going to be effective. In the past, and I can give you a recent example, I have sent a memo to the mayor and to the council saying when I think that change needs to occur. SB 1421 went into effect about 1.5 years ago, and that helps the public review peace officer records. And we don't have a mechanism in the city to do that. I made suggestions on how to make sure that those records were accessible. The press was really asking for them. And I have sent several memos requesting a funding so that this can be done. I've requested a public information office and asked that it be funded. I don't have the funding to do it within my own shop. I wish I could. And I'm not getting a response to that. I cannot make folks do things. What I certainly can do is flag it, but I need help from the community, especially during budget time, to ask for the things that are going to make a difference in our communities. So the city attorney will never be able to go it alone. I need to have the cooperation of the police chief, the mayor, and the council.
Thank you, Mara. Mr. Kevin, back to you.
I have the next question. And continuing with this theme, what additional problems of bias, implicit or explicit, do you see in the city's decisions and practices in reviewing, charging, asking for bail, prosecuting, or recommending sentences in criminal cases? And so it's two questions related to that. Based on your concerns and in light of the findings and recommendations of the SDSU study and Campaign Zero report, what changes do you believe are needed in the city's decision-making and practices of reviewing, charging, prosecuting, and recommending sentences in criminal cases? And let's go with Corey first.
So the city attorney's office is required by law to look at the economic ability of people to pay bail, of people to pay fines. The city attorney's office doesn't do that. That's already baked into the law. We do not do that. There's a ballot measure. It may or may pass to deal with cash bail reform. That's a separate conversation. But right now, the city attorney is obligated to look at those issues. When I talk to criminal defense attorneys, they say it never happens, that the city attorney's office comes in like a bunch of cowboys and always wants the full amount. You can see in the news, people have been left in jail on minor charges, even during the pandemic, because they can't afford the bail. As a board member of MOGA, we're working on a bail assistance program. It shouldn't come to the private sector to be doing what the law already requires. So in order to make sure things were even, we will be looking at the economic consequences of fines and of bail on every single individual. Remember, the lawyers at the city, they're getting paid to twiddle their thumbs in court no matter what. But people have to take off work and go spend time in a court system and spend hours and hours and days. They're harmed even worse than the charges against them.
Mara?
I almost forgot what that question was. Actually,
Would you like me to read?
Yes, Kevin, if you could, please.
Based on your concerns and in light of the finding recommendations of the SDSU study and Campaign Zero report, what changes do you believe are needed in the city's decision-making and practices in terms of reviewing, charging, prosecuting, and recommending sentences in criminal cases? I know it's a mouthful.
Yeah, it is. Thank you for repeating it. So this is a systemic problem. It's not the city attorney's office that's creating all these problems. Fines and bails are determined by the court, not by the city attorney. We're really lucky here in San Diego. We've got a presiding judge that has worked closely with my office, the DA's office, and the public defender. So to say that people are sitting in jail is absolutely false, because the number one priority was to try to get them out of jail so that they wouldn't be exposed to the pandemic. So I just want to make that clear. Half of my office is focused on community justice, finding a way out of the criminal justice system. When I talk, we typically get 2 new classes of attorneys a year in our criminal division. And I start their training by explaining, your job is to take a holistic approach to the person before you. Their lives may very well be in your hands. If you're going to charge them, you better be darn well sure you've got something to charge them with. But if you can help fix them and get them back out and self-sufficient out of the criminal justice system, that's what we want you to do. And that's why we have created so many programs for that purpose. Try to help people leave the criminal justice system.
Okay. And here's a quick one, just for yes or no for this one as the follow-up. Will you commit to an independent audit of biases in the city's decision and practices in this regard? Yes or no?
Absolutely.
Mara?
Yes.
Okay. AG?
What alternatives to misdemeanor prosecution do you favor, and in what kinds of cases? And also, how would you improve and expand on existing alternatives to prosecution? And what new alternatives would you adopt? And we'll go with Mara first.
I've already touched on our community justice initiative. That's half of our office trying to focus on getting people back on the right track. That's where our SMART program comes from. That's where a new program we created called PLEADS comes from. And PLEADS is if the officer interacts with somebody who obviously has a drug problem, they're not going to charge them first. They're going to offer them the alternative of getting services. And if they go for the services, it's like the two never met. They never even meet my prosecutors. That is a really great way to do things. And when we have, so I have misdemeanors, they're low-level offenses, but some of them are atrocious offenses, DUIs, domestic violence, elder abuse, child abuse. Those need to be handled through the criminal justice system. A lot of the other issues that we encounter, theft or vandalism, they are sometimes the result of childhood experiences or somebody's economics or the way where they live or the friends they have. We want to work with those folks to try to help them find their way out of the system. And when we can do that, we all feel better about it. The prosecutors in my office are trained to try to do that because we see the person and we want them to succeed.
Thank you, Martin.
The violent offenses should remain in the criminal justice system. But economic and minor property crimes, the misdemeanor filing shouldn't even occur unless there's been an inability to get a resolution, whether it's through community service, restitution, those sorts of things. We need to be looking at what got the individuals in that place in that situation in the first place. But let's remember, once there's a misdemeanor filing, that lives with the person years and years and years down the line. If they try to go get jobs, that could show up. You can do searches on the internet for people. I've heard horror stories about people who had a misdemeanor minor years and years and years. And until we banned the box a couple years ago, that lived with them. It's like wearing the scarlet M down the road for minimal things that nobody thinks are criminal today. So we should only be putting people in the misdemeanor system if it's a violent offense or if we've exhausted all other avenues of dealing with it, whether it's behavioral, substance abuse, mental health issues. But putting them into the misdemeanor system should be a last resort. If it's health care and mental health, we should be trying to get them into covered California so that we can get them health care treatment and into services.
Thank you, Corey. Time. You touched on some important parts around the harm that being prosecuted does, even if it's a misdemeanor. And I want today to know if there are any misdemeanors that you can commit to not prosecuting if you are elected or reelected. And we started with Mara. Mara, we'll go with you.
Yeah, so absolutely, if we can avoid the criminal justice system, that's what we want to do. And I couldn't agree with you more. Having a misdemeanor on your record could impact your ability to rent an apartment, buy a car, get a job. And that's why I work so closely with the Public Defender's Office to come up with programs that are going to free people of that additional baggage because they need an opportunity to succeed. That's why we have taken it upon ourselves to remove people from gang injunctions. We have 2 in the city of San Diego, to address marijuana offenses that are in somebody's record. So this is the hardest part, I think. When you're running as hard as you are, you sometimes stumble across things, and seditious language was one, where the Voice of San Diego pointed out. We have moved to have that taken out of the municipal code. I guarantee there's many more antiquated laws that need to be addressed, and I would invite the community to let me know when they see that. So we will encounter them ourselves, and we will move to have those removed, but I'm not always aware of problematic code sections. The code is giant. So that is my invitation to the public. If you see something, say something, work with us, let's get it fixed up.
Thank you, Mara. Corey.
Yeah, look, I'm gonna commit to not charging things like Dr. Carol Wayman for code violations and having the house sold, which is something that was done under this city attorney. I'm gonna commit to no longer prosecuting crimes that appellate courts have said it would be unconstitutional for us to enforce. I'm going to commit to regularly reviewing our municipal code, because there was a time when the seditious language provision was being used, and yet the incumbent's been there for 4 years. You could read it. Why did it have to be a newspaper that pointed it out? The lawyer's job is to review these things regularly and point out problematic issues. And by the way, when I find things that shouldn't have been prosecuted, unlike the incumbent, I will go back and make sure that people get refunds for the fines that they wrongly paid, like in the seditious language example. Doing nothing to make sure that those people get their money back. It means more to them than it does to the city attorney's office. So they should be given refunds so that they can move ahead.
Thank you, Corey.
Why don't we go with Kevin now?
Yeah.
We're short on time.
All right. If elected, how will you incorporate the views of impacted community members into any and all of the above discussions we've had, or in your decision-making generally? Mara, as the incumbent, please feel free to identify current efforts as well as future plans, and then we'll go to Corey.
Yeah, so I do have an advisory board that I think I need to expand to ensure that there are other voices being heard. I meet regularly, at least pre-pandemic. It's gotten a little more challenging with the ACLU to see if there are any concerns that they have. I mean, with their legal director. And that's one way of keeping my thumb on what's happening in the community. I check in, I oversee what happens in our office. We've got almost 400 people, but I hear from my prosecutors where they're seeing problems, and they're trained to identify where we're seeing issues that need to be remedied. As I mentioned early on, after George Floyd, I reached out to as many people as would speak to me to try to understand what we could do at the city attorney's office to address systemic racism and make sure it's not happening in my own shop. And I think that's important. And I've gotten excellent feedback, like the conflict resolution I was talking to you about. That was just a collaborative thought of working with folks that know a lot about these issues. I work with the local universities to identify issues that need to be addressed. So I am constantly seeking knowledge so that we can change if we have to and create when we need to.
Okay, thank you, Corey.
I would start by getting rid of the systemic racism in the city attorney's office. And I'll do that by hiring people of color. I want the city attorney's office to look like San Diego, top to bottom, left to right. Go to the city attorney's website right now. You'll see that 3 of the 4 department heads are a bunch of old white guys who've been there for a long time. We're long past their shelf lives. We need to have leadership in the city attorney's office advising the city attorney who come from San Diego's diverse communities, who represent San Diego's diverse communities, who have lived experience, so that they can help me translate that experience and the experience of their neighbors into appropriate city attorney policies, whether it's on the criminal justice side, whether it's on the advisory side, whatever the issue, whether it's on the hiring side. I've had a good life, and I haven't seen all of the things that other communities in San Diego have seen. I've been lucky. I've never had the talk. I need advisors who've been in that role. You don't have it now. Just go look at who's running the city attorney's office. The chief of staff is another old white guy. This is unacceptable. You need to have leadership all the way down to entry level that looks like San Diego so that the work product reflects San Diego. So I start with getting rid of the institutional racism in the city attorney's office.
Okay. I want to move over to Cheryl. As we're getting close, we want to kind of start wrapping up. Cheryl?
Thanks. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, candidates. We are quite interested, of course, in how what relationships you have with Black people and how they are influencing your thinking and your decision making. Corey, I do appreciate the lead-in that you gave us. And Mara, we would like to talk about your commitment to racial diversity at all levels of staffing within your office. Could you give us some feedback on that?
Yeah, I'd love to. So as I mentioned, I am Mexican American. I'm the first woman to hold the position. I'd say that counts for some diversity there, and my mom would agree. I hired the Chief Diversity Officer. It's the first we've ever had in our office. He has created some amazing programs to ensure that we are looking at potential bias and studying inclusion. We have a robust diversity and inclusion program within our office. The training is exceptional. We have reached outside the office to bring in platforms that will help us double check our own work to make sure there is no systemic problems within our own shop. So I do take offense to that comment, and the people that Corey would like to lead would as well, I can assure you of that. On their own, from being inspired by a statement I put out after George Floyd's murder, my attorneys got together and formed the Racial Equity Initiative within our own office. It looks at education, looks at hiring, looks at the programs we utilize when we are addressing city issues or prosecuting, all in an effort to do their share. We work with all the diverse bar associations. Whenever we have a position, we send our notices out. One of our attorneys went to Howard. She's now formed a relationship with them, and they are sending us applicants. So we are doing everything we can to diversify our office. I will point out, we are one of the lowest paid offices in the state of California. And there's been surveys to show that. It's difficult.
Thank you.
Sure.
Just real quick, how many Black attorneys do you have in your office now?
Oh, I don't, there's almost 180 people. I'd have to go through the roster. I don't know the number off the top of my head.
More than one?
Yes.
More than 5?
Um,
Okay, we'll find out. Corey, what specific measures will you undertake to recruit and promote qualified Black attorneys?
Well, in addition to reaching out to all of the HBUCs for recruiting, as I mentioned in the last question, I want people of color in my leadership ranks because I want to be recruiting from people who come from the communities affected by our decisions. That's why I want those people to be my assistant city attorneys. So in addition to reaching out to those schools, those law schools, I want to have those people in my leadership ranks because I need them to help me bring in new people. I also have relationships, as I mentioned, some of the organizations at the beginning. I'm supported in this campaign by Earl B. Gilliam Bar Association. I have relationships with people there. Those are the folks I go to on issues when I don't understand them. And let's be honest about this. On issues of race, I know the least. That's why I have to be surrounded by people. I know what I don't know. And so reaching out to those schools for recruiting, expanding internship opportunities, even for people who are just at the college level thinking about careers in the legal system, San Diego State, UC San Diego, USD, the other schools, national, all of them should have a pipeline into the city attorney's office so that we are trying to get San Diegans, the same way we want community-oriented policing, we want community-oriented lawyering.
Thank you. And actually, you've touched on a few things, again, Corey, that we were going to raise. Mara, it's not that we're singling you out, it's just that we want to make sure that we hear from you on the same issues. Can you talk to us, Mara, about who you look to for insight and guidance on issues of concern to Black Americans generally and Black San Diegans specifically?
Yeah, I mentioned I have an advisory board that probably needs to be expanded. I work with the Black faith community. I do my own research. I work with the colleges that have information that's helpful. I review the studies. We do our best to diversify our own staff. We actually send attorneys into our local high schools to be mentors and to help them plan for college. So we do a ton of outreach outside of our office to maintain and create those relationships.
Thank you. I'm going to try this one more time for both of you. Name names, please. Who do you look to? Who for advice and guidance? We'll start with you, Corey. We'll only spend 30 seconds on this, and then we'll go to Mara. Then we have one last question, and then we'll see if we have time for questions from the audience.
Are you asking for organizational or individual names?
Yes, name some names.
Individuals.
Yes, please.
Yeah. Genevieve Jones-Wright, Andrea St. Julian, the Reverend Richard Lawrence, Ramla Saheed.
Mara.
Well, Mika's on my my advisory board, so is Bishop Bowser and Pastor Hauser. I have a file of the Black faith leaders I've been speaking to, Pastor Moten. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, but I'm willing to listen to anybody who wants to talk about these difficult issues. We have people in my own office who have had a very difficult time getting to where they are in their careers, and they're the most important voices. They can really give us a lot of guidance, and they're serving on some of the committees in-house that I mentioned.
Thank you. So just generally, broadly, share some vision. What kind of leadership initiatives can Black San Diegans count on you to pursue? And second, in what ways have you already shown up for San Diego's Black communities on these issues? We'll start with Corey, 1 minute, and then Mara, and then we'll see if we have questions from the audience.
So on the leadership initiative issue, one of the things that the city attorney's office needs to do, it doesn't do now, is focus on economic justice issues. We have an EEOC programming and contracting, and yet we have a paucity of Black contractors and contractors of color who get city contracts. The council member Montgomery Stepp is going to have the Office of Equity coming into play. That's important, but there needs to be partnership with the city attorney's office to make sure that we're properly diversified who gets taxpayer dollars. We should be keeping money locally as much as possible. We have contractors of color. We should be using them as much as possible. We don't. Can you tell me what was the second part of the question?
What ways have you shown up for Black people already? So it's not just something that you're forecasting, but something that you've invested time in.
Long before I was ever running for office, I've been board member or lawyer for Partnership for Advancement of New Americans, that's African refugees, board member and counsel for CSA San Diego County, which does immigrant rights and works with the Chaldean community out in East County. As I mentioned, I've been on the board of MOGO, Community Advocates for Just and Moral Governance, for however long we've existed, a year and a half. I think my time is short.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Mara, do you need me to repeat, please?
No, I got it. Thank you. I mentioned the disparity study to try to make sure that everybody has an opportunity for the city's work. The EEOC is not a division of the city that reports to the city attorney. That is a division we can work with, but I think we need a mayor that's equally committed and will ensure that it's properly staffed. The gun violence restraining order program that I created is really important to the Black community. That's how I got to know Bishop Bowser. Black Americans are 10 times more likely to die of gun homicide, and they're 14 times more likely than whites to be injured in a gun assault. I think that has been extremely important work. The conflict resolution program, I want to start it probably in District 4 and just see if we can grow it. That's going to take a lot of cooperation and resources. And that's something that came from our faith leaders collaborating with me. So I think that those are going to be very important programs. Of course, we're going to continue our community justice initiative, which is going to offer solutions instead of punishment to people who really need help instead of incarceration. I am supportive of seeing systemic changes to our system. I've got the relationships with the district attorney, the public defender, and the courts to create new innovative programs. We've all worked together so well through the years to do that. Those relationships matter.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from the audience? It doesn't, I'm not getting any flagged here. Kevin, I'll kick it back to you for your last remarks and closing statements.
Okay. So as we come to a close of our time together, as we stated in the beginning, we'll give you an opportunity for a 2-minute closing. In the closing, if you care to add any additional information about your past education, training, experiences that make you uniquely suited to serve San Diego as the San Diego City Attorney. Let's go with Mara first.
This has been my career working for the public, and I have really loved it. I take great satisfaction in knowing that I'm leaving San Diego a better place than when I came to it. And I've got a record of achievements. I've been able to pull together a lot of support across the aisle, Democratic Party, firefighters, Planned Parenthood. These are really important groups. Some of our top leaders, Tony Atkins, Lorena Gonzalez. I have a reputation of fighting for working people. My dad was one. He was a union guy for 40 years. And those are important issues. I'm the first in the family to have gone to college, gone to law school. This is a big deal. And things weren't so easy growing up. I certainly can appreciate the challenges that a lot of people have. Are we closing? Because I can continue, or is this just the answer?
Yes.
You have 1 minute and 10 seconds left.
Oh, thank you. All right. And I think especially as we're trying to deal with a pandemic that has really challenged people's abilities to survive, to keep their homes, to feed their families, hold on to their jobs, experience matters more than ever right now. This is not an experiment. I'm somebody that brings a steady hand. I have the support of my own attorneys. They are all on board and wanting to get my objectives done. I'm running against a person who has spent his entire career fleecing San Diego. We have almost 90 lawsuits brought by him. He'll tell you that the city needed to be sued, but there's always a price to pay, and then he'll exit. This isn't about making San Diego better. This is about lining pockets. And I question why he would want to leave the very office he brags about wanting to eliminate. Our criminal division, get rid of them. Having an elected attorney should be appointed. Why run for this? Why eliminate the checks and balances that San Diego expects out of its city attorney's office? This is progress versus disruption and chaos. And San Diego deserves a leader who's going to get it done. And that's what my record shows: gun violence, domestic violence, elder abuse, standing up for the toughest issues that really impact people on a day-to-day basis. So I appreciate BAPAC for holding this today. Thank you for having me.
Okay, Corey?
San Diego does deserve a city attorney who will get things done. San Diego doesn't have that now. Until this campaign got hot and heavy, pretty much everything you've heard tonight is new.
Yeah.
The only reason she's making changes is because she's in a tight re-election race. The one thing she did do before this re-election, the gun violence restraining orders, she goes after Black San Diegans more than twice the percentage of their population. It's 6% in San Diego. She goes after them 14% of the time. There's bias in the city attorney's office, and she's done nothing to eliminate it. She should have known coming to a BAPAC meeting exactly how many Black lawyers she has in her office, and she does not know. That tells you that she's not been doing the job for the last 4 years. I'm one of the lawyers who helped point out the illegalities of the streetlight surveillance contract that she approved that she said nothing about. I'm one of the lawyers who sued the city to help the press get the facial recognition information when the police department was denying that we used it, and it turns out that her office signed off on the contract for that. She doesn't talk about gang injunctions. Gang injunctions are a problem. They should be going away, but they're not. We have a huge economic justice issue. I mentioned that on contracting. Let's face it, the money is going north of the 8, and it's going largely to white businesses. That's unacceptable, and it's unconstitutional. The lawyer's job is to make sure that we're spending our money lawfully. We're not. I got into this race not because it was on my bucket list to run for public office. I've sued the city many, many times because the city breaks the law. I get paid to win, and in getting paid, it means I had to prove to the judge that the city was better off because of what we did. Mara Elliott gets paid even when she loses. That's not okay either. I'm in this to restore confidence, honesty, integrity. Mara Elliott is taking a pension that voters eliminated in 2012. $3.5 million will come out of taxpayers' pockets if she's allowed to keep that pension, which voters eliminated for elected officials. You want an honest city attorney. You want a transparent city attorney. That's what I bring to the equation. Thank you.
Okay. Well, we said there would be tough questions. I want to thank you for your time and participation to the candidates. I want to thank the audience who tuned in for your careful attention. I wish we had more time. There were so many good questions and presented to our committee and the members. We wish we would have had more time to include them all. So thank you in advance for voting the audience in this critical election, and for your voting your entire ballot. Remember, that's very important. I will now turn the program over to BAPAC San Diego President Ellen Nash for closing remarks, and thank everyone for attending. Ellen? Hello, Ellen.
Yeah, here I am.
Okay.
I wanted to say thank you to all that here, Mara and Corey, for responding to our clarion call. I want to thank the committee, particularly Cheryl Althea Phelps and Professor Kevin White. And I really want to thank Erin Glass Blake because she was very instrumental in helping us put this together. Both Mara and Corey, I really appreciate you. Mika, for being here. And I thank you, the audience. And I just want to remind you that tomorrow, October 19th, is the last day to register to vote. So please register to vote. This is an election that we cannot sit out on. And we're looking at not only just the president, but all the down ballot issues. So if you need information on all the candidates, we've ran these forums for the last 4 or 5 months, 7 months. You can go to BAPACSD.org. You can listen to all the forums before you complete your ballots. And we hope you make very informed decisions about the direction and the leadership of our country, but more importantly, the city of San Diego. Again, thank you all for being here, and have a wonderful evening. And let's make this happen. Vote, vote, vote. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Love you
All right.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.